such a privilege to stand up and talk after such a rousing, energetic song. Thank you very much to the men for the time that you spent to do it, and for the beautiful song as well. Lifted our hearts and voices. Right. Quick, I'm going to try to keep it quick. The pastoral team has been scratching their head because our worship services run on and on and on, and Elder Victor promised that at 12:30 he's going to start playing the music, and I don't know how to fit it into 10 minutes, but let's see what we can do. The scripture for today, I'm continuing in the story of James, and it says, "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but no deeds, but has no deeds? Can such a faith save them?" As you know, I've been preaching through the book of James little by little, and almost every time I've started with a personal life story, and I know I'm going to run out of stories because my life is not that interesting. Last time I think I stopped the story when my girlfriend broke up with me. Do you remember? I had a girlfriend for 6 or 7 years. She was studying down in Cape Town to be a theologian, and I was in Durban 1,000 miles away. And probably the problem is distance didn't work out that well at that point. I even drove down with some of the church members to try to persuade her to fall in love with me again, but she chose somebody else. But little did I know that God had a different plan for me, because waiting in the wings, not really waiting in the wings, to be honest, just making an immediate appearance in such a way that it kind of swept my feet under me. Somebody else arrived by the name of Simone, who happens to still be somebody who sweeps me off my feet every once in a while. And she just kept phoning me, this Simone. And I just couldn't understand why she wants to talk and talk and talk and talk. But fascinatingly, with all the talking, something started clicking inside of me that I need to do something with this person. Invited her to go watch a play with me. And it was quite funny. Remember, this is South Africa. This is just as apartheid was beginning to change. My wife comes from a different sector of South African society than me. And we go into the play, and I've not learned my lesson yet, but my wife is always one who wants to sit in front. She doesn't want to be at the back. And so she takes me to the front, and it's a play where the actors interact with the audience. So guess that they begin to interact with us. And at one point, the actors stop and they say, "The two of you, you're clearly different. You're a white man, she's a mixed race lady. You sit closer to each other. You're in the new South Africa you need." And this was still very early in our relationship, and they said, "Put your arm around her. You've got permission to do that." And it felt quite weird, but I actually ended up putting my arm around her. First time I got permission to be able to do it. And very quickly, we became very much enamored with each other. And so much so that when my dad came to visit, my dad actually said, "Weiers, I know you've just broken up with your girlfriend in the Cape 4 months ago. You mustn't break this girl's heart." And there was something about my dad's statement about that was, actually, if you listen to it very carefully, my dad was saying, this relationship probably isn't going to go, is it going to go to marriage or something like that? He was worried because of the culture difference. And he was actually saying, and for the first time I read that, my dad was giving me a little bit of advice, don't. And I just said to my dad, I love this girl. I think something is going to develop here. And immediately my dad just dropped all his questions and says, if that's what you want to do, you go ahead and do it. And up to today, he has been a great supporter. But my conference president was a white Afrikaans man. At that stage, he called me in when he realized, when we announced that we're getting engaged. And he started telling me, he says, I've got a big problem with you as a pastor now, because you're an Afrikaans guy. I could never make you to become a pastor in an Afrikaans church if you get married to that girl. And I like, for the first time, I felt this tension inside of me because my beliefs said one thing. The system was trying to put pressure to go in a different way. And for the first time, I thought, Weiers, you need to become a little bit of a man here and just stick to your principles and put that in. And that's what I ended up doing. You know what is hilarious? Just after I got married, there was an Afrikaans-speaking church in Durban that needed a new pastor. Their pastor had left. It was a small church, 30 members or so. And they said, Weiers, don't you just want to take that church as one of your 3 other churches that you're looking at? So it became my 4th congregation. And my wife walked in that first Sabbath. We were nervous. And that congregation became such good friends with my wife, much more than with me. They just loved her and encouraged her. So that was a really good experience. So anyway, I'm telling you too much and we're running out of time. But so the illustration that I needed to just look at is one of the things that my wife brought into the relationship was a gift that she got from her family, from her great-grandmother. You won't believe what it is. It's just a tea set. And there was a story in the family that this tea set is an incredibly valuable tea set. It comes from the time of Queen Victoria, we were told. And so it was something really special. And so when I got married to her and she moved into the house, guess what moved into the house with us was this tea set. And so I can't remember if it was, and I always heard that story. And one day, I think it was about 12, 13 years later, when we were actually moving to the United Kingdom, we wondered what we need to do with this tea set, because this tea set was going to come to England with us because it's so valuable. It comes back. At that time, we took the tea set to an antique person, a knowledgeable person, and they took one look at it and they said, you know what? If you put this tea set on eBay, and eBay wasn't a big thing at that stage, you'd probably get £5 for it. It isn't as valuable as you think it is. That did change our mind. We left the tea set in the box at my uncle's place. But every once in a while, you must talk to my wife. She will tell you about this tea set because it means a lot to her. It means more to her, not only because it's not about the value, but it's just where it comes from and the story that goes along with it. But James, to get to James is talking about our faith, and he says, how can you be sure that you've got a valuable faith? That the faith that you have is something that is valuable, that you can hold on to, and that will give something back to you. And all the way throughout James, you actually get quite an interesting set. James 1 verse 22, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourself. You've got that word, you hear that? Deceived. So you can be deceived that something is valuable, or it can be really valuable. Here's another verse, James 1 verse 27. And of course, James 1 verse 22 says, So instead of just listening to the word and deceiving yourselves, what do you have to do? You have to do what the word says. James 1 verse 26. Those who consider themselves religious and yet did not keep a tight rein of their tongues do what? They deceive themselves. And what? Their religion is worthless. So again, James wants us to have a valuable, worthy religion. And that's exactly the same as what we encounter in today's scripture, James 2 verse 14. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone has faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? And what is the answer that James is expecting over there? It says, no, it can't. And so the big question I want to ask today in the few more minutes before Victor starts playing the music is, how do I have a genuine faith? Do you have a genuine faith? Do I have a faith that's worth something or something that's precious? Or is it something that's worthless? Do I have a faith that will, according to this verse, save me on the day of judgment? And so I'm going to make 3 quick points. The first point, and it comes from just analyzing that section of James 2 verse 14 to verse 26. And the first point is a true and living Christian faith is not a matter of words, but it is a matter of deeds. And if you analyze that text in the New International Version, which is the one that I have in front of me at the moment, between verse 13 and verse 14, there's like a gap, and it makes a new title, and it says faith and deeds or something. But actually, I don't think that gap needs to be there, because the first part of James, which we spoke about the last time when I was here, which is about favoritism, actually what James is saying, if you really want to have a real faith, put your beliefs about favoritism into practice. And what does that mean? Don't have any favorites. Don't choose people just because they are just the same as you. Try to expand your love and your care for other people outside of just the group that you are normally comfortable with and involved with. And James actually goes on in 2 verse 15, and he says, suppose a brother or a sister without clothes and daily food. And then he says, if one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, and that's where you leave it. And you can just hear when James is preaching this sermon, what do the people say? No, you can't do that. You can't just say, oh, okay, I'll pray for you, brother and sister. They say, no, something else is needed, because what you need to do is, he says, what good is it if you cannot do anything for their physical needs? And he wants the people to say where the problem lies. The problem lies with just having words and not having the action. Just thinking about something good. It's good to think about beautiful things. It's good to think about what is right and to have long discussions about it. But if it doesn't translate into action, then what is the result? Verse 17, in the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, it is dead. I remember, I might have said to this before, remember there was a time when I wanted a bicycle, and I really wanted a good bicycle. I spent days, months looking, what is the best bicycle I can buy? And eventually, I actually bought the bicycle, and I thought that it was the best one until I got onto it. And suddenly I realized that when I'm actually cycling, my legs get sore and my other parts of my anatomy get sore as well. And my back gets hurt. And suddenly I realized I know everything that there is to know about bicycles, or do I? because actually the pain tells me that I don't accept that. Now, here's the good, let me just, in case you don't want to have a bicycle, after about 2 weeks, your legs get a little bit less sore and the other parts of your anatomy become a little bit harder and stronger, and you don't have that kind of pain where you can be. But there's no other alternative than to actually, so you can talk about bicycles as much as you want, but to actually get onto the bicycle is what is important, because that is when you begin to know about bicycles. And even today, I'm still learning about bicycles. I need to learn a lot more about it, and you'll start seeing the difference if I did. So we often talk too much, but we don't do enough. And so just some very practical places. We live in a city, for example, that is filled with, let me just focus on this. James is especially interested in the vulnerable and the disadvantaged. And I wonder if we spend enough time looking after those people. We live in a city that's full of refugees. I don't know if you are aware of the fact that just in the last month or so, a whole hotel in West Hill has been cleared and has been transformed into a place where people who have come over by boats are being placed and are being looked after. But the problem is those hotels are really painful places to live in because, first of all, you don't have access to a kitchen. You can't cook for yourself. So you have to go and cook and eat the food that somebody else cooks for you. I wonder, even in your house, I'm sure the children will say, "Oh, Mom, not, what is it, fish again?" or not this again. But imagine if and it's a different culture that doesn't cook quite well, and it's cooked for mass consumption. In the hotel, the government says, "Oh, we give you the food, so therefore we only need to give you £3 a day to live on." You can't even buy a bus ticket to get into the city. I spoke to a refugee the other day. He lives out, he's found a house, but he lives out in Peter Coetser. And because he's got no money, he just walks into the city every single day. Now, Peter Coetser to here is probably an hour to hour and a half's walk for a person to be able to get there. In our community, there are those who have fallen on hard times. There are those who are going through a really difficult relationship breakup. There are those who find it difficult to relate to others or to make friends. There are those who have recently moved into the area and they are trying to find their feet. And there's an awful lot of that in Aberdeen. There are those with different cultures who have difficult adjustments to make. There are those who are not well physically. There are those who have fallen into a drug habit and who are experiencing those. And the question is, what are we actively doing for those people? Now, truth of the matter is we can't do everything for everybody. We're not the Messiah. We can't save the whole world, but we can make a difference. But even if we can make a difference, how do we do it? The one challenge we have is we outsource the care that we have. So, for example, I had a phone call just a few weeks ago, an Adventist pastor in Jamaica who runs a food bank in Jamaica, a really good food bank, says, "Can we as a church support that food bank? Please, can we send money?" And it's very tempting, and I do want to talk to all of us about it. We do need to do some money, send it, but we can, let's say we raise £2,000 and we send it to Jamaica, or £20,000, and we can pat ourselves on the back. We have helped, or have we? Because what we've done is we've outsourced our care to Jamaica, okay, so that they can look after people. But what are we doing looking after people here where we live? And I believe there needs to be a balance between that. I think there's two big things. Sometimes it can even be that I'm just picking on somebody, they're not here, but Sister Molly is our community services leader. Let's say that she gets up and she says, we're going to start something special. We're going to look after this group of people. We all become her cheerleaders. We say, yes, go for it, go for it, go for it. But my question to you is that enough? Because we support 2 or 3 people to do the work, but what about you and me? What are we doing to make a change? And I think there are especially two, so James 2 verse 17, faith by itself, which is not accompanied by action, is dead. James actually uses this example. He says, oh, well, in verse 18, he says, he imagines somebody who stands up to the pastor and says, well, you've got faith, you've got deeds, I've got faith, okay? So let me be the one who prays and let me be the one who discusses things, but you can be the one who goes and teaches. And what do you think James's feeling is about that? He says you cannot separate your faith and actions. The two need to feed into each other. And maybe the places where, and by the way, this is not salvation by works, okay? We'll talk about that in more depth. Some people say that James, Martin Luther famously said that James is the epistle of straw. Do you remember those words? Because he said Martin Luther focuses so much on deeds where Paul focuses on faith. But actually, if you read Paul very carefully, Romans, the biggest book that talks about salvation by faith, begins in Romans chapter 1, verse 5, I think. I've got it here. It says, through him we received grace and apostleship to call all the Gentiles to the obedience which comes from faith. So the beginning of Romans talks about the obedience that comes from faith. And then the last chapter of Romans, chapter 16, verse 26, says that people may come to the obedience that comes from faith. So sandwiched in between Paul, he says, yes, I'm going to tell you about this wonderful faith, but it has a purpose. It leads to obedience, to where it needs to be. The book of Titus, the knowledge of truth that leads to godliness. So if we know it, Jesus, of course, he says in Matthew chapter 7, he says, anybody who calls him Lord, Lord, will not enter the kingdom of heaven, but only those who do the will of his Father in heaven. And he immediately went on to then tell the story of the wise builders and the foolish builders, which is also the wise builders are the ones who put faith into action, the knowledge, and where the foolish builders are the ones who, we know everything in that day is about building. We don't need to worry about it. We can just go ahead. James 2 verse 19 even goes further, and he actually echoes what Jesus says. He says, you believe that there is one God, good. Even the demons believe that, and they shudder. Jesus himself also said that. So, yes, the demons might even know the 28 fundamental beliefs, okay? But is that enough for us to have? The demons did not have a saving faith, even though they knew God. They did not trust God. They did not willingly submit to him. And so their faith doesn't cause them to love God, obey him. It just causes them to shudder with fear. And so if demons are able to believe all the right things and still stay alienated from God, it must be possible for someone to have the right orthodox theology, even to talk about it and yet not be a believer of sorts. So there's a big challenge for us over there. I said 3 points. I'm going too long. But point number 1 talks about faith and deeds have to go together. And then what James does in this chapter, he uses 2 examples. And so each one of those examples will be point number 2 and point number 3. The first example is the story of Abraham. He says, even Abraham now think a little bit about Abraham. Was Abraham saved by faith or was he saved by deeds? That's a challenging question, but do you remember Abraham was an old man? He stopped being able to produce children already. And yet God comes and he says to him, you and Sarah are going to have a child. And what was the response? They were just laughing. Yeah, they called Isaac means laughter, at least, because they laughed when God brought this news. So could Abraham do anything to have this child that would bless the rest of the world? He couldn't do anything. God had to give his grace to save him. And then what happens next? And this is what James talks about. He says, Abraham has his wonderful son, and then God says, I want you to take your son and I want you to go and sacrifice your son. Do you remember? Imagine if Abraham had to tell his wife what he's going to do. It's one place where it's good for husbands not to always tell their wives what they're going to. No, don't follow my wisdom or advice on this. Abraham goes, and the book of Hebrews says that Abraham had faith in God, so much so that he believed that if he was to sacrifice Isaac, the book of Hebrews says God would come and resurrect Isaac. And in many ways, so Abraham goes and he sacrifices and he does something. So the point that I want to make is a true and living Christian faith involves sacrificial obedience. So the deeds that we need to do, just imagine being Abraham, this most precious thing, you're prepared to sacrifice it. What is the most precious thing that you have at the moment? And what are we willing to sacrifice? 2 things that we hold on to very tightly. The one thing is our wallet. The other thing is our diary. In other words, the money that we have, because that's that we spend time, we work, we save. But our diary is the time that we have, because it's so much more interesting to watch the Netflix series than to come to church again, take a bus to be where church might be. And I think to keep it relatively short, the question is, let me put it this way. Oftentimes, if you look at the church's budget, so if you look at the budget of our congregation, you can actually see the values that lie behind our budget by where we spend the most of our money. And sometimes, so the question is, what does your spreadsheet look like? Where are you spending your money? And if you look at your time, at your calendar, where are you giving your time? What are you devoting it to? I believe hobbies are really important things. So be it sport, be it learning something, playing music, all of that is brilliant, but can we dedicate the time we spend on those hobbies, can we dedicate that hobby to be a blessing to God as well, if that makes sense? The time. So what are we willing to sacrifice in our lives? There's lots of sacrifices. I think that the challenge that we need to make, also just, okay, I'll just focus. And then, of course, are we sacrificing our time to pray? I saw something the other day in social media, and it really got me thinking about it. I remember some of my earliest memories as a child is waking up at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and I'd go and say hello to my parents. Now imagine if you went to say hello to your parents at 6 o'clock in the morning, children. Will your parents be happy about that? I hope so. You should maybe do it. You know, every morning when I woke up, I would find my dad on his knees in front of the bed, and he would be praying. His Bible would be open. He would have already probably woken up before me. He would have been reading the Bible, but he would be on his knees and he would be praying. And the post I saw on social media said, in those days, people were really, that action of prayer gave you that quiet moment to reflect on your life. And it gave you so much more purpose and direction about where you went, that you would feel a tremendous sense of meaning and direction about where you go. And what the post was saying is, maybe today, if we forget to pray and we forget to spend our time, could that be the reason why we sometimes go through life and we just feel overwhelmed, and we need other people to teach us mindfulness and relaxation, where if we spend our time with God, we can learn from that. So just one example of making a sacrifice, but it's faith and it is works. And the final idea, before Elder Victor plays for us, third heading. And then finally, a true and living faith involves risky service. So if you look at the book of James, fascinating. The first example that James uses is a perfect example. It's Abraham. But can you remember who the second example is that James uses for faith in action? Rahab. Who was she? She was a woman of the night, maybe. She was somebody who in today, if Rahab was at our church today, there'd probably be some talk. Have you noticed that Rahab is here? Rahab probably didn't look like most of the people at that time. Rahab goes and it says something to me. It doesn't matter who you are or however messy your background is, God still wants you to believe in him. It's amazing to me that Rahab, whose values clearly originally and her actions didn't coincide with what mainstream morality would be teaching, and yet God was working through Rahab to do the work, and also transforming Rahab's life and building it. And it says to me that we need to look for God's presence in places where we don't always think it should be. And one of the questions is, one of the reasons why I wonder why James mentions this is, what about us? Because it takes a risk to put your trust in strangers. It takes a risk to become friends with someone who is not quite like you, somebody who doesn't have the same conversation or the same kind of values, somebody who looks differently. Maybe their background has brought them to act in ways that you don't know. And somehow I think James says, do you and I offer hospitality and welcome to those people that we don't like, that we don't agree with, that we don't, that society will be all up in arms about. And to me, that's a risk to take. It's a very scary thing to talk to somebody that you don't know. It's a very scary thing to talk to somebody who doesn't agree with you. And yet, that is what God does with you and me. because you and I were also in a state of alienation. And God comes and he gives his time and his love and his energy to you and me. And he wants us to convert that into something good. Let me not continue with that for too long. Let it be said that we are those who look out for those who are struggling, that we are those who welcome and love all out of love for Christ. Ellen White actually makes this statement so interesting to me. She says, the people who have been caught in sin feel so helpless and frustrated where they are. And what they require is somebody to come and show them love and compassion and care and help them deal with the ravages of sin in their lives. And that will give them the courage to convert their lives and to become better and better. It's a bit like the elephant who's misbehaving. But just by us being present, we can maybe transform the way that elephant behaves and give them new hope for where they can be. So James 2 verse 26, last verse. As the body without the spirit is dead, so faithful without deeds is dead. The faith without deeds is dead. So what James is saying, God wants you and I to be sure and confident of our salvation. Salvation is a gift. It is a gift of God that comes to us through our Lord Jesus Christ. Our salvation, our assurance, our confidence doesn't depend on our track record. It depends on Jesus' track record. And that's where our confidence lies. But God doesn't want us to have a false assurance. And that is why in his providence he has caused this letter of James to be preserved for us. And here's the question. Do I have an empty faith that is all mind and mouth? Or do I have a real and living saving faith in which mind and mouth flow out of a changed heart? And then it goes hand in hand with sacrificial obedience and with the risky service of others. That's what I had to share today. Thank you.